On September 2nd, 1609, an English explorer hired by the Dutch to find a faster route to the riches of the Orient steered his 80-ton ship off the surging currents of the North Atlantic and into an immense sheltered bay.
New York City was founded by the Dutch. The Dutch didn't give a damn about anything except making money. And the more money you made, the closer you were to God. And they would build some churches to thank him for his generously setting things up for them.
Unlike Boston or Philadelphia or many other places in the United States, New York was not founded by visionaries anxious to create a new place to practice their own version of religious freedom. The Dutch came to New York City and established a trading post there to make a buck or to make a guilder. And that acquisitiveness, that materialism, that search for the success has dominated New York and characterized New York ever since the white person first set foot on this land. And even today, there's an energy in New York, there's a bustle in New York. And that bustle has been there for more than 350 years.
You're constantly being forced to, whether you want to or not, watch other people with wildly radical styles. That's what a New Yorker in some way commits to, that constant life of transition, the constant possibility of change.
It was always the place of greatest opportunity. It was not the West.
And if you can change yourself, presumably in the process you are also changing the whole structure of the world that you operate in order to make your new fictive reality come alive.
It was always the place of greatest opportunity. It was not the West. The West was the place of greatest opportunity if you were going to be a rancher, you know, but say you weren't.
New York is continuously throwing up new ideas and new people. This turns out to be the setting in which political democracy becomes possible as in no other. It is exactly that money-crazy, driving, commercial culture that made political democracy seem perfectly sensible, perfectly normal, and indeed brought it into existence such that a popular democracy was established for the first time and men of the people governed.
One of the reasons that this place is endlessly in flux and it's endlessly recomposed is because it is, in fact, a capitalist city. It is a place where capitalism has been allowed to work itself out with the least kind of impediments, for good and for ill. The good is that it produces incredible, dazzling things, but the downside of it is that you get what you pay for.
When most Americans think of history, they don't think of New York. They think of Williamsburg or Philadelphia or Boston.
When New York was founded at the dawn of the modern age, London and Paris were already 1,500 years old. Rome and Beijing, 2,000. Jerusalem, 4,000. And yet, somehow, in the centuries to come, the tiny colony on the edge of the world would rise to become the greatest city on earth, the undisputed cultural and economic capital of the world, and the supreme laboratory of modern life.
I think one of the real turning points in the history of New York is that it doesn't become the federal capital. If it had ever become the federal capital, it would have been an entirely different city. It would have been a kind of London, very concerned with its past. It would have had military monuments. It doesn't have that. It just remained a place to do commerce, to come here. People came all the time to make money.
Almost single-handedly, Alexander Hamilton had kicked into life the most powerful economic engine on earth. Along the way, he had helped invent the future, not only for himself, but for the city and country that had allowed him to rise.
I think he believed that meritocracy, which is the way in which Americans join capitalism and democracy. It is the way in which there can be great wealth, but there can be no barriers to anyone of talent, hard work, determination, and ability achieving them. I think that that combines the two. He was no friend to real democracy. He was not at all interested in the masses of people having political voices. But I think he was very much interested in creating a dynamic society in which anyone of ability could rise. That's really American democracy in action.
The slab of glass, a totally new form, developed out of Le Corbusier's earlier work. Sheer slab, he'd never gone so extreme. Glass facing east and west, no windows facing north and south, on some kind of idea of solar orientation. Then the assembly building with its swoopy roof, a new kind of shape that has nothing to do with the city, has to be in a park because of its sculptural force. Basically, there had never been a building like that seen in New York or virtually anywhere else. All that glass, it's what everybody's been dreaming about. It's what a little bit of what you could have got a hint of if you'd gone to the fair in '39, and people are thrilled.
I think I love them from the inside. I didn't find them beautiful and interesting at first sight, but as I get to know them, as I found out that to build those two monoliths, you had to add a group of insane designer, architects, structural engineer, builders, hundreds of them for years. It became something to love. I love their strength and their arrogance somehow. They were so overlooking the skyline of New York. Somehow anything that is giant and man-made strikes me in an awesome way and calls me. And I cannot see the highest towers being built without wanting to celebrate their birth right there.
From start to finish, the story of the World Trade Center would be an extraordinary parable of American power. A parable of the forces reshaping New York in the post-war period, and of those reshaping the globe.
It wasn't about consensus back in those days. It was about a very powerful agency knowing how to get its way, busting through all obstacles, all objections no matter how valid. And that's just the way it worked. It's just the way things got done. Back then, it's the end of the era of great building in a way. It's still a time when, even in a complicated municipality like New York, you can pull off a project like that. And you can do it the way you want to do it.
But by the time David Rockefeller rises and replaces his uncle, Winthrop Aldrich, as the chief executive at Chase, it's a different place, New York. And the port is already on its way out. And something needs to happen in Lower Manhattan if it's going to regain the status that it once held as the world's financial center and that it was losing.
It would take more than a decade for the idea of the World Trade Center to begin to get off the ground, and 4 decades more to fulfill the lofty promise of its name. When it did begin to take hold, however, in the late 1950s, it would be set in motion to a remarkable degree by just 2 men, sons and brothers of one of the most powerful family dynasties on earth, who would seize upon the idea not only as a glorious symbol of world trade, but as the centerpiece of one of the most controversial and daring real estate gambles in the history of New York City. The effort to save Lower Manhattan, which less than 10 years after the end of the war had been sent spiraling into a period of steep decline, not only by the waning of the port, but by an alarming exodus of businesses to the middle of the island.
Lower Manhattan, which I'll describe as the 2 square miles from Chambers Street down to the Battery, was dying. Companies were moving out, either to mid-Manhattan or really out of New York City. The only new building built since World War II was the Chase Manhattan building. And David Rockefeller was then the chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank. And so David had an idea. Why not create, using the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, a World Trade Center, whatever that was?
Is that they're monopoly capitalists, and that gives them a certain attitude towards planning. The Rockefellers thought big. When they built Rockefeller Center, they didn't build one skyscraper, they built a constellation of skyscrapers. They were into centers, you know, they were into thinking of long-term plans. So they applied that mentality everywhere. And the same attitude is transferred when the next generation comes online. And here, David is a particularly interesting figure. David's got big plans. David wants to expand one of the family banks, Chase Bank, which worked with big companies and financed the movement of trade goods around the world. And David wants to expand this and then go beyond the old national boundaries and sort of start thinking internationally. But he's got a short-term problem. He merges with the Bank of Manhattan Company. He's got Chase Manhattan. He buys up lots of other little banks. They're scattered all over the downtown area. He wants to, in fact, bring them together and consolidate. But it's in the middle of this kind of sucking sound with all of these businesses being drawn up to where the real action is up in Midtown. And the question is, are they going to make a stand? Are they going to try to, in fact, save Lower Manhattan as the financial center?
Everybody knows Chase Bank may be the most powerful bank in the world. David Rockefeller might be the second most powerful person in the United States after the president. They're putting their bets in Lower Manhattan, saying Lower Manhattan either has to be revitalized and rejuvenated, or it's going to enter into a period of terminal decline.
In 1955, declaring Lower Manhattan to be the heart pump of the capital blood that sustains the free world, David leapt into the fray. That November, he stunned Wall Street by announcing that Chase would build a gleaming new 60-story headquarters, just 1 block north of the stock exchange, the first tall tower to go up in the area since before the Depression. 6 months later, convinced in private meetings that even that bold gesture would not be enough to save the financial district, he assembled a powerful coalition of business and real estate leaders called the Downtown Lower Manhattan Association, and urged them to develop an even more ambitious plan before it was too late.
You need bold visions, you need bold action. You can't take small little piecemeal things. That's not the way they operate. Rockefeller Center is not a small piecemeal action. You have to make a profound impact on the environment, and to do it spatially and to do it in terms of the structure of the economy. And it's got to be big scale, it's got to be blazing, otherwise it doesn't do the trick.